Shaq has million-dollar deals on his phone, but he is holding a simple $12 meal. The manager throws his change on the floor and tells him to get out. This moment shows a huge contrast. At 10 p.m., the quiet diner is full of tension between rules and power. Shaq looks for a kind heart, but he only finds a mean face. With a secret file from an old manager, he starts a journey for justice. Who will lose everything when this story ends? The clock on the wall of the Rusty Spoon read 10:14 p.m. A big man sat alone in the back corner booth. His name was not on any sign here. Nobody in this diner knew who he was. He wore a plain gray hoodie and old sweatpants. His shoes were size 23, and they were scuffed and worn. He stood 2 feet 10 inches tall in his socks. His body barely fit in the small plastic booth. The chair let out a low groan every time he shifted his weight. It held 147 kilograms of tired muscle and bone. His phone sat face down on the table. On the screen, a text waited from his lawyer. It talked about a deal worth $412 million. He had not opened it yet. Right now, he only cared about one thing. He wanted a quiet plate of fries and a cold soda. He wanted to sit in the dark and just breathe for a while. He watched a small drop of ketchup slide off his fork. It landed on the toe of his left shoe. He did not wipe it off. He was busy watching something else across the room. A woman in a stained apron stood near the counter. Her name tag read Loretta. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. A tall man in a cheap gray suit stood over her. His name was Silas Crane, and he managed this diner. He pointed a bony finger at a coffee cup on her tray. "This cup has a lipstick mark on it," Silas said. His voice was flat and cold. "Do you know what that costs us?" "Reputation costs money, Loretta." "I'm sorry, sir. I'll get a new cup right now," Loretta said quietly. Her hands were shaking a little as she reached for the tray. "Sorry does not pay the light bill," Silas said. "One more mistake tonight, and you can find another job." He turned and walked back toward his office without looking at her again. The big man in the corner watched all of this, without moving a single muscle. His face stayed calm, but his eyes tracked every word. Back home in Newark, his mother Lucille used to clean floors for people just like Silas. He remembered her tired feet after 12-hour shifts. He remembered how she never once raised her voice, no matter how tired she was. Watching Loretta reminded him of every hard night his mother ever worked. He was not ready to act. He was just a man eating a quiet meal after a long day. Tonight, he wanted nothing to do with saving anyone. He just wanted his fries, his soda, and some silence. The old jukebox in the corner buzzed with static. It played a slow song nobody was really listening to. Outside, rain tapped softly against the diner windows. The whole street looked empty and gray under the streetlights. A few minutes later, Loretta walked past his booth with a fresh pot of coffee. She glanced at him and gave a small, tired smile. He nodded back, but said nothing. She moved on to the next table, refilling cups with careful, steady hands. Silas came back out from his office a few minutes later. He held a clipboard tightly against his chest. His eyes scanned the diner floor like a hawk looking for prey. He noticed the big man sitting alone in the corner booth. "Sir, we close in 20 minutes, Silas said, walking closer to the booth. His tone was sharp, almost rude. "You'll want to settle your bill soon." "I'm almost done," the big man said. His voice was low and calm, like distant thunder. He kept his eyes on his plate, not looking up. Silas studied him for a second, unimpressed. He saw a large man in old clothes, nothing more. He did not see a superstar or a rich man. He only saw someone taking up space in his diner. "Fine, just don't linger," Silas said, walking off toward the register. The big man finished the last of his fries slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of cash. $12.35 was the total on his bill. He placed a $20 bill on the table for Loretta to collect. Loretta walked over and picked up the money with a smile. "I'll get your change right away, sir," she said kindly. She walked to the register, where Silas was standing nearby watching her closely. She counted out the change carefully, right in front of Silas. He watched her fingers move over each coin and bill. "Hurry up," Silas snapped. "We don't have all night for this." Loretta walked the change back to the booth, her hands slightly trembling. She placed the coins and bills gently on the edge of the table. "Here you go, sir." "Thank you so much for coming in," she said softly. Before the big man could even reach for it, Silas rushed over. He grabbed the small pile of change off the table without warning. Then he threw it hard onto the dirty diner floor. The coins scattered loudly across the tiles, rolling under nearby tables. "Pick it up," Silas said, his voice sharp and mocking. "We don't serve people who can't handle their own money." The whole diner went silent. A few late-night customers turned their heads to watch. Loretta froze near the counter, her mouth open in shock. The big man did not move at first. He simply looked down at the scattered coins on the floor. He looked up slowly and met Silas's eyes, without any anger showing. His face stayed completely calm, like still water on a lake. Inside, something old and heavy stirred in his chest. It felt just like the nights his mother came home crying quietly. "Get out," Silas said, pointing toward the door. "We don't need your kind of trouble here tonight." The big man stood up slowly from the booth. The plastic chair groaned in relief as his weight lifted off it. He towered over Silas by nearly 1.5 feet. Silas took a small step back, though he tried not to show fear. "I'll pick it up," the big man said quietly. His voice did not shake, and his hands stayed steady. He crouched down low, his knees cracking from the effort. One by one, he gathered the coins from the dirty floor. Loretta rushed over, with a small dustpan to help him. "You didn't deserve that, sir." "I am so sorry," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Silas watched from a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Get back to work, Loretta," Silas barked. "This isn't your problem to fix." Loretta stood up quickly, her cheeks turning red with embarrassment. She glanced at the big man one more time before walking away. The big man placed the last coin into his palm. He stood up straight again, towering over the small diner room. He did not say another word to Silas. He simply turned toward the door and walked out into the rain. Outside, he stood under the diner's small awning for a moment. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the roof above him. He looked back through the window at Loretta, still working quietly. Something told him this night was not over yet. He walked slowly to his car parked around the corner. Before starting the engine, he sat quietly behind the wheel for a while. He thought about his mother's hands, cracked from years of hard work. He thought about every manager who ever looked down on people like her. A soft knock came at his car window a minute later. It was Loretta, standing outside with an old folded envelope in her hand. She had slipped out the back door during her short break. Her eyes darted nervously toward the diner entrance behind her. He rolled down the window slowly, looking at her with quiet curiosity. "You dropped something inside," Loretta said, though that was not quite true. She held out the worn envelope, her hand trembling slightly in the cold air. "I didn't drop anything," he said gently, studying her nervous face. "I know," Loretta admitted, glancing over her shoulder again. "But somebody needs to see what's inside this. I think you might actually care." He took the envelope carefully from her shaking hand. It felt thick, stuffed with papers and old receipts inside. "Who gave you this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "A man named Barnaby," Loretta answered quietly. "He used to manage this place before Silas. He got fired for asking too many questions about the money," she continued. "Before he left, he gave this to me for safekeeping." She looked back toward the diner window one more time nervously. "I have to get back inside before Silas notices I'm gone." She turned and hurried back toward the rear door of the diner. The big man sat alone in his car, staring at the envelope. Part of him wanted to just drive away and forget tonight. Another part of him could not stop thinking about Loretta's tired eyes. He opened the envelope slowly, his large fingers careful with the old paper. Inside were photocopies of pay stubs, notes, and bank statements. Numbers were circled in red pen across several of the pages. He began reading through them under the dim light of his phone. The papers showed shortages in employee paychecks over 6 months straight. The total missing amount came to $14,280.50. Loretta's name appeared several times, along with other tired-looking names. Notes in the margin explained how Silas was skimming wages quietly. Another page showed fake numbers reported to corporate about diner sales. Silas had been hiding real profits, while claiming losses to headquarters. This meant he was stealing from both the workers and the company. The big man closed the folder slowly, feeling anger rise in his chest. He thought about Loretta's shaking hands as she counted his change. He thought about her tired eyes and her worn-out apron. If this folder ever reached Silas by mistake, she would lose everything. Her job, her income, and maybe even her small apartment. He knew she was raising 2 kids alone on this diner paycheck. She likely owed rent, bills, and probably a car payment too. One wrong move here could destroy her entire fragile life. He sat quietly in his car, wrestling with what to do next. For a moment, he considered simply driving away from all of this. He told himself this was not his mess to clean up tonight. He came here only for a quiet meal, nothing more than that. Getting involved would mean stepping back into a role he was tired of playing. He thought about all the times people expected him to save the day. Everywhere he went, someone needed something bigger than a meal or a smile. Tonight, he just wanted to be an ordinary man eating dinner alone. He slid the folder into his jacket pocket, deciding to leave. He started the engine, but sat there for another long minute. His mind kept drifting back to Newark, back to his childhood apartment. He remembered his mother, Lucille, coming home each night with sore feet. She worked 3 jobs just to keep food on their table. She never once complained about her bosses, no matter how badly they treated her. She always said dignity was the only thing nobody could take from her. He remembered her voice clearly, even all these years later. That memory made his chest tighten with an old, familiar ache. He pulled his phone from his pocket and found an old contact. The name read Barnaby Coyle, a number he had not called in months. His thumb hovered over the call button for a moment. Finally, he pressed it and lifted the phone to his ear. The phone rang 4 times before someone finally answered on the other end. A tired, wheezing voice came through, followed by the sound of a machine. "Hello? Who is this calling so late?" The voice asked, breathing heavily between words. "It's me, Barnaby. It's been a while," the big man said gently. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of oxygen machines. "I never thought you'd actually call this old number back," Barnaby said weakly. "Loretta gave me your folder tonight," the big man said, keeping his voice low. Another pause followed, longer this time, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Then you already know what that man is doing," Barnaby finally said, coughing slightly. "Tell me what happened to you there," the big man asked quietly. Barnaby sighed, and his voice grew a little stronger. "I ran that diner for 22 years, back when it still had heart," he said. "People came in from 3 counties just for our meatloaf special," Barnaby continued proudly. "It was more than food. It was where tired people felt seen." He coughed again, the sound rattling through the phone speaker. "Then Silas came in with the new ownership group last year," Barnaby explained. "He called our old ways wasteful and outdated. Said the diner needed real standards, real discipline." His voice grew tight with old anger. "I caught him stealing from the register within 2 months," Barnaby said. "When I reported it, they fired me instead of him. Said I was too old, too slow, too sentimental for this business. I gave that folder to Loretta because I trust her heart," Barnaby said. "She reminds me of the good people who used to work there." He paused, his breathing growing heavier through the phone line. "Being tired doesn't mean you should just walk away," Barnaby said firmly. "You need to stand tall for people who cannot stand for themselves." His words hung in the quiet car, heavy and clear. The big man sat silently, letting those words settle deep inside him. He thought again about his mother's tired hands and her quiet dignity. He thought about Loretta's shaking fingers as she picked up scattered coins. Something inside him shifted, quiet but absolutely certain. "Thank you, Barnaby. Get some rest," the big man said softly. "You take care of yourself too," Barnaby replied, his voice fading with exhaustion. The call ended, leaving only the sound of rain on the windshield. He turned off his car engine and stepped back out into the rain. He walked back toward the diner entrance with slow, heavy steps. Through the window, he could see Silas talking loudly at the counter. Loretta stood nearby, wiping down tables with tired hands. He pushed open the diner door, and the small bell rang softly. Silas looked up, annoyed to see the big man had returned. "We're closing soon. What do you want now?" Silas asked sharply. I have a question about my bill, the big man said calmly. He walked toward the counter, each step slow and deliberate. I was charged $12.35 for my meal. That's correct. Is there a problem? Silas asked, crossing his arms tightly. I'd like to see the full receipt and register log, the big man said. Just to make sure everything adds up correctly tonight. Silas laughed, a short and mocking sound. You want to audit my register? That's rich, coming from you. He gestured toward the big man's worn hoodie and old sweatpants. You look like you can barely afford a meal here, Silas sneered. Now you want to play accountant? Get out before I call security. His voice grew louder, drawing attention from nearby tables. I'm not leaving until I see that log, the big man said calmly. His voice never rose, but it carried weight across the room. Loretta watched from behind the counter, her eyes wide with worry. Silas's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Get out of my diner right now, he shouted, pointing at the door. You're nothing but a broke, oversized troublemaker tonight. The big man did not move an inch from his spot. He simply pulled out his phone and began recording quietly. He held it low, almost hidden, capturing everything happening at the counter. Silas noticed the phone and grew even angrier. Turn that off. You have no right to record me, he yelled. Other customers in the diner began pulling out their own phones too. I'm calling the police right now, Silas said, reaching for the diner phone. You're trespassing and you're harassing my staff tonight. He dialed quickly, his hands shaking with rage. Within 10 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up outside the diner. 2 officers walked in, their flashlights cutting through the dim lighting. Silas rushed toward them immediately, pointing at the big man. This man is harassing my employee and refusing to leave, Silas said loudly. He's been threatening us and recording us without permission. He gestured wildly, trying to paint a dramatic picture for the officers. One officer turned to the big man calmly. Sir, can you explain what's going on here tonight? The officer asked. I paid my bill and asked to see the receipt log, the big man said simply. He threw my change on the floor and told me to pick it up, he added. Loretta stepped forward suddenly, surprising everyone in the diner. That's true, officers. I watched the whole thing happen. Silas turned toward her, his face pale with shock and anger. Loretta, get back to work. This isn't your business, he snapped. It is my business, Loretta said, her voice shaking but firm. I saw him throw the money on the floor, Loretta continued bravely. This man was kind and calm the entire time tonight. Silas glared at her, clearly furious at her sudden courage. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly unimpressed with Silas's story so far. We're going to need everyone's statement, one officer said calmly. Just then, a shiny black car pulled up outside the diner. A well-dressed man stepped out, adjusting his expensive coat quickly. He walked in, with a confident, almost bored expression on his face. What seems to be the problem here tonight? He asked loudly. This was Reginald Voss, the diner's true owner, from the parent company. He rarely visited in person, preferring profits over people. Sir, thank goodness you're here, Silas said, relief flooding his voice. This man is causing trouble and refuses to leave, Silas explained quickly. Reginald looked the big man up and down with obvious disdain. We don't want your kind of business here, Reginald said coldly. I only asked to see the receipt log, the big man repeated patiently. That request seems reasonable, given what I witnessed tonight, one officer added quietly. Reginald frowned, clearly annoyed by the delay. While everyone argued near the front counter, the big man noticed something. Silas kept glancing nervously toward his small office in the back. That nervous glance told him exactly where to look next. While the officers questioned Silas about the earlier incident, the big man slipped away. He moved quietly toward the small office at the back of the diner. The narrow doorway forced him to duck down low. He had to turn his massive shoulders sideways just to fit through. Inside, the office was cramped, filled with old filing cabinets and boxes. A single desk lamp cast a dim yellow light across the room. He spotted a folder labeled Staff Adjustments sitting on top of the desk. He opened it carefully, scanning through page after page quickly. Inside were names of employees, with strange deductions listed beside them. Loretta's name appeared again, along with several other tired, familiar names. Each person had money quietly taken from their paychecks over months. The list read like a blacklist of people Silas had targeted. Suddenly, the office door swung open behind him without warning. Silas stood in the doorway, his face twisted with fury and panic. "What are you doing in my office?" Silas shouted, stepping inside quickly. "I found your little blacklist," the big man said calmly, holding up the folder. Silas's eyes widened with fear, then narrowed with sudden desperation. He reached quickly into his desk drawer, pulling something small out. It was a small taser, black and compact, in his shaking hand. "Get away from my desk right now," Silas warned, pointing it forward. The big man did not flinch or step backward at all. "Put that down before someone gets hurt tonight," the big man said calmly. Silas's hand trembled, but his anger overpowered his fear completely. He pressed the trigger, sending a jolt toward the big man's arm. The taser crackled and connected with a loud, snapping sound. The big man's body stiffened for just a brief moment. Then he simply straightened back up, barely affected by the small shock. His size and calm nature absorbed the jolt like a minor annoyance. Silas stared in disbelief, his weapon now feeling completely useless in his hand. "That's all you've got?" the big man asked quietly. He did not raise his voice or move towards Silas aggressively. Instead, he stood completely still, letting silence fill the cramped office. Silas's breathing grew ragged, panic rising visibly in his chest. "You're not scared of me," the big man said softly. "You're scared of something inside yourself." Silas's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. "I built this diner into a real business," Silas shouted suddenly, his voice cracking. "Corporate wanted numbers, and I gave them numbers every single month." His hands were shaking now, the taser drooping at his side. "People like you and her don't understand real pressure," Silas continued, pointing toward the door. "Every dollar I saved kept my job safe from being cut." His voice grew louder, filled with years of buried resentment. "I threw those coins because people like you deserve nothing better," Silas admitted. "You're supposed to scrape by, not sit there judging me." His confession hung heavy in the small, cramped office space. The big man listened, without any anger showing on his face. He simply nodded slowly, absorbing every word Silas shouted. Inside, he felt something settle, a quiet and steady kind of resolve. "You built this place on other people's suffering," the big man said calmly. "That's not strength. That's just fear wearing a cheap suit." Silas's shoulders slumped slightly, the taser finally falling from his hand. The big man reached slowly into his own jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. Silas watched, confused, as the phone rang only once before connecting. "This is Marcus. I need the paperwork finalized now," the big man said calmly. A voice on the other end confirmed everything was already prepared and ready. "Good. Send it through immediately," he instructed firmly. Silas frowned, completely confused by what he was hearing. "What paperwork? What are you talking about?" Silas demanded, his voice shaking slightly. The big man simply smiled, still calm and unreadable. 15 minutes earlier, sitting quietly in his car, he had made calls. He had contacted his lawyer and the CEO of the parent company. The purchase of this building had already been quietly completed. He had bought the land, the building, and the business license outright. Every paper had been signed electronically, while Silas argued with the police outside. Silas had no idea his entire world had already shifted. Reginald Voss's phone buzzed loudly out at the front counter. He answered it, his face slowly draining of all its color. The voice on the other end explained everything in careful, clear detail. "Sir, I'm being told the diner has a new owner effective immediately," Reginald said, stunned. He turned toward the office, where Silas stood frozen beside the big man. Reginald walked quickly toward the back office. "Is this true?" Reginald asked, bursting through the office doorway. The big man simply nodded, holding up his phone as proof. Silas's legs nearly buckled beneath him from the shock. You bought this place?" Silas stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The whole building, the whole business. Effective right now," the big man confirmed. Silas stumbled backward, bracing himself against the old filing cabinet. His mind raced, trying to understand, who this man really was. Then it hit him, memories of highlight reels and championship rings. His eyes widened, with recognition, fear flooding through his entire body. You're him, Silas whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. The big man said nothing, letting the silence answer for itself completely. Silas sank slowly to his knees on the office floor. He reached toward the floor, as if trying to gather invisible coins. His hands shook uncontrollably, his composure completely shattered in that moment. "Please, I didn't know who you were," Silas begged quietly. "That was never the point," the big man said gently. "It shouldn't matter who I am for you to be decent." His words landed heavy, cutting through Silas's desperate excuses. "Don't pick up coins for me," the big man said calmly. "Pick up your own dignity, if you can still find it." Silas stared at his empty hands, unable to respond at all. Meanwhile, Reginald tried a different approach, his voice turning sharp and legal. "You cannot force a sale like this. I'll sue for unfair pressure," Reginald threatened. The big man simply handed him a folder. Inside were Barnaby's original documents, proving years of fraud and wage theft. Reginald's face went pale as he flipped through page after page. This changes things significantly," Reginald muttered, his voice shaking. "Any lawsuit you file will expose everything in these documents," the big man said calmly. "Corporate fraud, unpaid wages, falsified reports. All of it becomes public record." Reginald closed the folder slowly, defeated completely. "I'll have my people handle the paperwork quietly," Reginald said, backing toward the door. He left quickly, his confident swagger completely gone from earlier. Only Silas remained, kneeling on the floor. The big man helped Silas to his feet, surprisingly gentle in his grip. "Get up. Groveling won't fix what you've done," he said firmly. Silas stood shakily, avoiding eye contact with everyone nearby. News of the sudden ownership change spread quickly through the small diner. The police officers exchanged surprised glances, lowering their notepads slowly. Loretta stood by the counter, hand covering her mouth in shock. "Wait, you bought the whole diner?" Loretta asked, stepping closer in disbelief. The big man nodded, offering her a small, tired smile. "Somebody gave me a reason to care tonight," he said softly. The officers, seeing the situation resolved, began packing up their notepads. "Looks like this isn't a police matter anymore," one officer said. They left quietly, nodding respectfully toward the big man on their way out. Silas stood awkwardly near his old office, unsure what came next for him. "Am I fired?" Silas asked quietly, his voice small and defeated. "Not yet," the big man answered simply. He asked everyone still in the diner to gather together. Loretta, two other tired waitresses, and a young cook all stepped forward. Silas stood slightly apart, his shoulders hunched, with shame and fear. "I want to know what's really been happening here," the big man said. "Not the numbers on paper. The real stories behind them." Loretta spoke first, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "He's been cutting our hours, without telling us," Loretta explained. "Then blaming us when the paychecks don't add up right." The cook nodded along, adding his own quiet complaints about missing overtime pay. One waitress mentioned being threatened with firing over small, silly mistakes. Another explained how tips were sometimes taken for processing fees that never existed. Every story matched what Barnaby's old documents had already revealed. The big man listened to each person carefully and patiently. He asked questions gently, letting each worker share their full experience. By the end, the picture was painfully clear and consistent. Silas had built his management style on fear and quiet theft. He punished honesty and rewarded silence among his tired, struggling staff. Nobody here had ever felt safe enough to speak up before tonight. "Thank you all for trusting me with this," the big man said. "Things are going to change here, starting right now tonight." His voice carried quiet certainty, calming the nervous group around him. It was now nearly 2 a.m. at the diner. The big man asked everyone to stay a little while longer. He wanted to settle things properly before the sun came up. He pulled out his phone again and made another quiet call. This time, he spoke with his personal accountant about employee back pay. Every dollar owed would be returned, doubled, from Silas's own assets. Silas overheard this and opened his mouth to protest loudly. You can't just take my personal savings, Silas argued weakly. Your contract has a clause about employee theft violations, the big man replied calmly. You signed it when corporate hired you 2 years ago, he continued. Theft like this voids your protections completely under that agreement. Silas had no response, his shoulders slumping in silent defeat. Loretta watched quietly, still trying to process everything happening around her. The big man turned toward her, his expression softening slightly with warmth. I have a proposal for you tonight, he said. I'd like you to manage this diner, starting immediately, he offered. Loretta's eyes widened, tears forming quickly at the unexpected offer. Me? I don't have any management experience, she said nervously. You have something more valuable than experience, the big man said gently. You have compassion, patience, and real respect for people. Loretta wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her life. I accept, she said, her voice shaking with emotion and gratitude. The other staff members smiled, some even clapping softly at the news. Silas stood alone, watching his old power completely disappear before him. What happens to me now? Silas asked quietly, almost afraid to know. You'll work here too, under Loretta's supervision, the big man said. Silas's face twisted, with humiliation at the sudden reversal of roles. You'll clean, you'll stock shelves, and you'll learn some humility, the big man added. Every dollar you took will be paid back, with interest. Silas nodded slowly, too exhausted to argue any more tonight. The big man reached into his jacket and removed his gray hoodie. Underneath, he wore a simple shirt with a small charity logo. It represented years of quiet work helping struggling families across the country. This diner is going to change its name, he announced to everyone. It'll be called the Big O'Neill's Home, starting tomorrow morning. Loretta smiled, through her tears, nodding in grateful agreement. We'll serve good food and treat people with real respect, he continued. Nobody here works in fear of losing everything over small mistakes. The staff nodded together, feeling hope for the first time in months. As dawn approached, the big man walked toward the diner's front door. Loretta followed him outside, still processing the incredible turn of events tonight. Thank you for seeing us, she said softly. Thank you for trusting me. With that envelope, he replied warmly. He stepped outside, into the cool morning air. The rain finally stopped completely. The street was quiet, painted gold by the early sunrise. Near the diner entrance, a young boy sat alone on the curb. He looked tired and hungry, his clothes worn thin and dirty. The big man recognized that same look from his own childhood memories. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $1 coin. He knelt down slowly, careful not to frighten the startled young boy. Instead of tossing it carelessly, he placed it gently into his palm. Buy yourself something warm this morning, the big man said kindly. The boy stared up at him, eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Thank you, mister. Nobody's ever been this nice, the boy whispered. The big man smiled softly, remembering Newark streets from long ago. He stood up slowly, watching the boy hurry off toward a nearby bakery. Behind him, the diner's new sign was already being installed. Loretta stood in the doorway, watching the sunrise with fresh determination. She now had a real chance to lead, with kindness and fairness. The diner would finally reflect the values it once had. As the big man walked toward his car, he thought about tonight's events. A thrown coin had somehow led to a hidden truth. That truth had restored dignity to people who deserved it most. He thought about his mother, Lucille, and the lessons she taught him. Real power was never about money, or fame, or status. Real power meant lifting others up instead of stepping on them. He climbed into his car and started the quiet engine. Before driving away, he looked back one more time. The Rusty Spoon sign was already coming down from its old post. Soon, a new sign would rise in its place. It would carry a promise of dignity, fairness, and second chances. Somewhere inside, Silas was already learning what respect actually meant. Loretta would run the diner with the same strength her workers deserved. She would remember every unfair moment she once endured there. She would make sure nobody felt that way again under her watch. As the big man drove into the early morning light, one question stayed with him. Would people choose to simply pick up coins thrown at their feet, or would they choose to stand tall with their own dignity instead?